Hi there, my name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Alan Shipnuck, the senior writer at Golf.com and Golf Magazine. In this episode, I chat with Alan about his early years at Sports Illustrated, his approach to reporting on golf, transitioning to Golf.com and Golf Magazine, the differences between new and old media, as well as his advice for young journalists breaking into the industry. The Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to episode 56 with Alan Shipnuck on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I'm joined by Alan Shipnuck. He's a senior writer at Golf.com and Golf Magazine. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
All right, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And before we get into your career covering the game of golf, I just wanted to ask, your pinned tweet with Rory McIlroy, Ryder Cup 2018, and of course, the famous question, where's Alan Shipnuck? Of course, I remember you wrote a column thinking that Europe didn't have a chance, and it was Europe, retaliating. But what was that like for you, just being called out like that?
Well, I kind of knew it was coming because even before the press conference started, like Ian Poulter was pointing at me and Sergio Garcia was blowing kisses to me. Obviously the U.S. got their butt kicked in Paris, and it was a totally dysfunctional team, and the captaincy was a disaster. So there's some things that you couldn't account for Patrick Reed blowing the whole thing up like he did, but it was a long range prediction, and I still think it's going to come true. I mean, you look at the age of the core of the European Ryder Cup team. They're all 40 plus, whereas most of the top Americans are in their 20s and early 30s. And so I think the 2020s U.S. is going to dominate, and I will somewhat be vindicated. But it wasn't a great start. The way the U.S. team performed in Paris. So I mean, it was fine. On Twitter and elsewhere, people were really mean and rude, which is expected. But the European players had a sense of humor about it. They got the last laugh. And so whether it was Rory or Poulter or Westwood, all those guys were pretty fun. And so this wasn't quite as painful as you might imagine. But definitely, you never want to make yourself. I mean, I just wrote a little column for Golf.com. I didn't think it was a big deal. I just tossed it off and forgot about it. It took on a life of its own for a year plus, and you don't really, as a reporter, want to be the center of the story.
No.
It just happened, and you just got to roll with it.
No, I mean, and I was just going to mention, one of the old, adages of journalism school is, never inject yourself into the story as a reporter or a journalist, and that, clearly violated that. But I think it's, it was, a memorable exchange of sorts, and I guess, it still lives on. But now you got to wait another year, Alan, to get that vindicated for 2021.
I know. Even, Europe even wins the postponements, right? Because you look at the American players have just been dominating on the leaderboards lately, and a lot of guys are in great form. Obviously, the guys stuck in Europe haven't been playing any tournament golf. I mean, if they'd gone ahead with the Ryder Cup in a few months, you would say that the U.S. had a big advantage. So, but who knows? Maybe that extra year will help. I mean, you would think that Jordan Spieth should be. He played one of the few Americans who really showed up in Paris, and with his standing in the game and his personality, he should be a team leader for the U.S. So maybe that extra year helps him find himself. Koepka has been playing poorly. We need him, as from an American perspective, to be on top of his game. So it's debatable which team that helps or hurts. If they had played the Ryder Cup with no fans, then obviously the U.S. team would have lost a lot of its advantage. So I think it's basically a push. But it is a bummer that we're not going to get an Open Championship or a Ryder Cup this year.
I want to sort of talk about, the era that we're in now in golf. And I know that for you, you're someone that, does a lot more long-form features for Golf.com and Golf Magazine compared to your days at SI covering the game. But, Obviously Tiger Woods still dominates the headlines. He just announced today, as we're recording, he's going to be playing the Memorial next week. But even in addition to that, Bryson DeChambeau, Brooks Koepka, Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth, there's a lot of real excitement now in the game of golf. And I feel like more than ever, there's, guys can win any tournament, it feels like. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this era of golf that we're in right now.
Well, in some ways, it was the best case scenario because life after Tiger was always going to be a huge challenge for the PGA Tour. Just the cult of personality that surrounds him, and the global icon that he is. So it was always going to be tough. And with the injuries and scandal, I mean, basically from 2014 to 2018, Tiger had disappeared, and that allowed this whole new generation to come through, whether it was Spieth or Thomas or Koepka. Certainly when Dustin Johnson went to a different level, a lot of young talent had a chance to not only emerge but be celebrated, and these guys became stars in their own right. And now Tiger's back, and he's still dangerous, and so it's kind of the best possible scenario where we still have Tiger as a potential foil and as a potential contender, but obviously the young guys are going to have to carry the tour week to week. And so the game's in a great place. Even who would have thought that Phil Mickelson would still be knocking around in his 50s, but he's still relevant, and through social media has become kind of even more of a personality the last couple of years. So I think it's an ideal mix of young and old, and you have a lot of international players who continue to emerge. And President's Cup down in the Royal Melbourne was fantastic, and if that can become a more competitive tournament, that'll help the game. Obviously, the Olympics is a fantastic stage for the sport. That's a recent development. So I think golf is basically healthy. I mean, the problem is that when Tiger Woods blew up in the late 90s, everyone thought that golf was going to become like the NFL. And there was a lot of over-promising and under-delivering, whether it's going to be new players who came to the game or new course openings, TV ratings, whatever it was. I mean, golf is a niche sport. It's always been a niche sport. That's where it belongs. And so if you can give up some of the fantastical predictions Tim Finchem and others made at the beginning of the Tiger era, you can recognize the game is doing pretty well. And I don't think it's ever going to be much bigger than it is now. That's fine.
You mentioned how, Phil Mickelson being on social media the last couple of years. And I think that's what I've noticed in the game of golf. It's just been more of these players adapting and embracing social media. Do you think that has enabled a younger audience to the game, knowing now that, these guys are on social media, they're commenting, they're actually quite funny when you peel back the layers on the onion, and that can, bring a new generation of fans to the game?
Yeah, for sure. I saw a comment on Twitter that has stuck with me. I don't know how I came upon it. It was kind of a thread within a thread. It wasn't anyone that I followed or interacted with. Just kind of a random golf fan talking about the conversation was about field strength. This was pre-corona, and I think it was one of the quiet weeks in Florida, and no stars were there. But this fan said, you know what? I would rather watch Joel Damon or Max Homa or some of these guys that I follow on Twitter because I feel like connected to them and their careers versus some remote figure. He cited Rory because Rory's kind of renounced social media. So he said, I don't have any connection with Rory. He's just a really good golfer. The other guys, I'm more in tune with who they are and what they're all about. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think that's the best case scenario for if you're the golfer trying to build your brand. Is it just be yourself, and hopefully people will enjoy it, and they'll become part of your crowd. It's also the way the golf media has changed. I mean, Kevin Kisner has become one of the biggest stars in the PGA Tour, basically because he very smartly aligned himself with Barstool. The guys over there, which is certainly not a traditional outlet, and only started covering the game in the last couple of years. So there's a lot of that. I mean, in some ways, I miss the old days. I mean, a lot of the golf media now is a little superficial, and a lot of it's sort of in jokes on Twitter, and it's kind of videos and of guys, kind of just playing golf and goofing off. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's certainly a place for it, but unfortunately, the kind of the traditional outlets, Golf World disappeared. Golf Week is a lie. It's now a monthly. The Golf Digest has gotten very skinny. They used to have an incredible writing staff of Hall of Fame talent, and all those guys are gone now. So there's nothing wrong with the new media in golf. I think it's added some energy, and as you say, it's helped bring in new fans. But unfortunately, kind of the traditional storytelling and journalism, it's vanishing. When I was on the beat in the 90s and the early 2000s, I mean, every big city newspaper had a dedicated golf writer. And when you go to, not even talking about the majors, just a good tournament, whether it was LA Open or something like that, the press room was packed. It was the writers from the Dallas Morning News and from the Orlando paper and Chicago and New York. And these guys knew the game. They followed it closely. There were characters. There was a lot of competition. I mean, journalism is a competitive business, and that pushes you to be better and to look for better stories and to hustle more. And so there was an incredible energy, and it was so fun the next day to read all the stories and see what you missed and what their takes were. And the perspective they were able to pull out of the players and the vantage points they had at the tournament. And it was really, it was deep reporting, and it was great as a fan of the craft. Other than those guys are gone now. I mean, it's tumbleweed blowing through the press room, and they've been replaced by PGA Tour social media staffers, basically, and they're just doing quick hit little interviews. And of course, everything is very raw and very sterile, and it's just not the same. So, there's been a lot of talk about the old man media versus new media in golf, and the problem with that dynamic is that there's a lot more of the new media, and kind of old traditional storytelling is disappearing. So it's not really a fair fight. But the more voices we have in the game, the more people who are brought to the sport, the better. So I support all of it. I guess I'm not that old, but I'm kind of a dinosaur because I came out in a totally different era, and I miss some of the old voices that we used to have.
And you talk about those voices, and I think what, and not to take anything away from new media, but I think what those old voices had, like yourself and many others, was the fact that they, did the diligent reporting. And I feel like now in this pandemic, this is now, as we're recording this, the 5th tournament back since the hiatus, since the PGA Tour shut down due to the coronavirus. And, limited media on site, obviously because of the health and safety protocol. But I'm just sort of curious for you. I know that you're not on the golf beat, but if you were, I feel like it was, such a challenge now because of the fact that not many media on the course, it's Zoom calls with players, and you can't get those little nuggets that can lead to really compelling stories.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, Corona is kind of accelerating some trends that were already in place. And you mentioned social media before, and I was talking about how the tour's media operation has gotten huge. And so the players were already becoming a little more remote because obviously they can control the message that comes from their social media channels. They know that they can control the tour. The tours are going to protect and coddle them. And so it's harder and harder to get guys to let you in and to really do like the big definitive profile stories because they don't have control of that, and they become more and more accustomed to being able to shape the message in the way they want. And again, it's fun to have the players interacting on social media, but you have to understand that they're presenting a certain side of themselves, and there's a depth and authenticity that's probably missing, that if you can go and spend many hours in deep conversation, like reporting a really great feature story, you're going to be able to peel back some of those layers. So the tone of the reporting has just changed. As you say, it's been made more apparent by the technological constraints during the virus era, but this stuff was already happening. I mean, traditional reporters were already traveling less because there's just not the travel budgets there used to be. Access is more limited. Player availability and willingness to go deep is has become more scarce. So everything was kind of heading that direction anyway. And now it's just in the coronavirus has kind of put a cherry on top of the whole thing where, you know, I'm having to do the nasal swabs and stuff is a pain for the players, but they're probably loving this environment where there's no reporters, there's no fans, there's no pro-am, there's no traffic getting to and from the course. The driving ranges are quiet. I think they can work without all the entourages and distractions. I mean, they're going to be sad when things go back to quote unquote normal, because life in the bubbles is pretty pleasant for the players despite its challenges.
Well, except if you're Bryson DeChambeau, Alan, you know, a cameraman distracting from the brand, like as you saw last week. So, except for him, there still seems to be some distractions.
Well, and so that's an interesting case, because one of the few reporters who was on site that week was Will Gray of Golf Channel, and he was just out there hoofing. He saw that discussion between Bryson and the cameraman. And then he went up and talked to Bryson afterwards and got those comments that kind of blew up and became a huge talking point in the golf world and obviously on social media. And that was just old-fashioned shoe leather reporting. And none of that happens if he's not on site. Mm-hmm. And that's why you need reporters there, because they see things that the television cameras won't show. And that's going to even get worse, by the way, because PGA Tour is going to essentially become the production arm, the new contract for all the TV telecasts. So they're not going to show, you know, if Sergio loses his mind and tears up a bunker with his wedge, they're not going to show that. They're not going to show John Rahm getting in the face of a fan, or Bryson, you know, calling out a camera guy. Like they're going to present a very sterile product that strips away any controversy, any edge, any buzz. And so you need people on the ground to be the eyes and ears. You know, Bryson being upset with the camera guy is not a big story. It's not a big deal. But his comments about how the tour should protect our brand, like that's highly revealing. It tells you where the players' heads are and where the game is going. And so in that regards, it was a very revealing exchange, and not just about Bryson, but the whole relationship, you know, the tour becoming this caretaker to the players' images. And so, it was, again, that was just old-fashioned hustle by a reporter with some good instincts. And that's why you need guys on the ground, because it's otherwise you miss out on a lot of those kind of stories.
So you're a senior writer for golf.com Golf Magazine. And I'm just curious, because I've been a long-time subscriber of SI, Sports Illustrated, where you formerly worked. And I would always get, like, there would be these weeks where I would get the SI magazine and then the SI Golf magazine. Is that this Golf magazine the same thing as it was back then? Can you just maybe describe sort of the deal of that, or was it a completely different operation?
Yeah, so that was called Golf Plus, and that was like a special insert that went to subscribers who loved the game and also, you know, fell into certain demographic categories. And that started in 1994. That was how I got my start at the magazine as an intern, because they were just launching Golf Plus, and they realized they could use some manpower. And so I was there for the whole thing. And I mean, throughout the whole 90s, and the timing of that launch was perfect, because the Great Big Bertha had just come out and was kind of revolutionizing the equipment industry, and it had gotten more cutthroat. And so they're all, you know, all the manufacturers were growing, and they had big advertising budgets. And so Golf Plus was booming. I mean, throughout the whole 90s, we probably had 40 issues a year that had the Golf Plus supplement. And sometimes it was like this thick, you know, it was 40 pages of editorial plus the ads. I mean, it was basically double the size of the magazine when you picked it up. And then after the internet bubble burst, and then in 2008 with the recession, I mean, over time, the frequency of Golf Plus just kept being reduced. It was down to 38, and then 32, then 24, and then 20, and then 16 weeks a year. And you know, the amount of content was shrank as well. And then so concurrently to that, Time Inc., which was the parent company of Sports Illustrated, bought Golf Magazine. I want to say that was 8 years ago. And then golf.com became sort of the joint, and Golf Magazine and golf.com are basically the same company at that point. So golf.com became the shared website for all the content from Golf Magazine and from Sports Illustrated. That's where it all wound up. So for 5 years, I was writing for all three platforms. I was doing a lot of stuff for SI. I was doing occasional things for Golf Magazine, and then everything was showing up on golf.com. And then 2 years ago, Time Inc. was going to get bought and sold and dissolved, basically. And they started divesting some of their titles. So they sold Golf Magazine and golf.com. And I was kind of at a fork in the road if I'd stay at SI or go with the golf properties. It was the right choice to go with the golf properties because the handwriting was on the wall for Sports Illustrated. And as you've probably followed in the media, it's really hurting and its future is very uncertain. The guy who bought Golf Magazine and golf.com, his name is Howard Milstein. He's big in the financial and the real estate world in New York, and he's invested in a lot of different golf properties, and he was committed to making Golf Mag and golf.com a lot better. And so, which they have. I mean, he's invested a lot in both. I think for the last 40 years, basically, if you had to compare, you'd say Golf Digest was the leading golf magazine in the space, and Golf Mag was sometimes was close, sometimes it wasn't. It just kind of depended on the staff mix and what was going on. But I think it's probably the first time you can really say without a doubt that Golf Magazine has surpassed Golf Digest, just from an editorial standpoint. The presentation, the physical dimensions, Milstein invested a lot more money to make the magazine bigger, the paper's thicker, which feels good, but also you can reproduce images with a much better quality. So the photography looks great, the layout, all that. So I've been full-time at Golf Magazine and golf.com the last 2 years, and definitely proud of how much they've improved and all that's gone into making them so good.
And what does your job entail at golf.com and Golf Magazine? And what I can imagine is the multi-platform nature of a journalist compared to your days at SI where it was just strictly print.
Yeah. I mean, in like the 90s and the 2000s at Sports Illustrated, I mean, if you wrote like 22 stories in a year, you were killing it, man. You were like a hamster on a wheel. That was mega production. And I mean, it's funny to think about now because, I'll go to the Masters. I'll write 8 stories that week just for golf.com. And that's just 1 week out of the year. So I have a column in every issue of Golf Magazine that sometimes it's opinion-based, sometimes it's a little mini feature or a look at some corner of the golf world. Sometimes it's PGA Tour, LPGA. A lot of times it's just the larger world of golf. The issue that just came out, it's kind of a feature on this guy named Todd Rohr, who he revived Mackenzie bags and left them and started McDonald Leather Goods, which is this really high-end golf bag company. And he's just a unique character, and he's had a remarkable journey in the game, and it's just fun to tell his story. So I have a column in every issue, and I usually have a feature in every issue too. And that's the challenge, is always you need to be working on 3 or 4 stories at a time, it feels like, because you're writing one, but you're setting up the next one and the next one, because there's a lot of moving parts in these things, including having to get the photography and deal with the agents and the player schedules or whatever it may be. That's probably the most important part of my job, is making sure I'm pumping out great stuff for the magazine. For golf.com, obviously I go heavy when the weeks of the majors and the Ryder Cup, I'm on the scene, I'm writing about them. When there's news breaks, I'll riff on the news, whatever it may be. I did a column a few weeks ago about coronavirus and saying I thought the responsible thing to do would be to shut it down for a while, and because of where we are in this pandemic, and that created a lot of conversation. And then, I've for years, I've done this Ask Alan column where people just by way of Twitter send me their questions and I answer them. And that's kind of a fun way to interact with golf fans and draw upon all my years on the beat and all that. So it's just a mix of writing live from events, doing opinion pieces, doing big features for the magazine, doing the column, and whatever else just comes up. So it's nice, a job like The Athletic, which 2 years ago when all that stuff was happening with leaving SI and going to Golf Magazine, The Athletic approached me about being their golf guy, and it's a great product. I'm a subscriber. I love reading. The reading experience, there's no pop-ups, there's no ads. It's very clean, very pleasing. But that job would be 90 98% just pro golf. Like they just want you to go be out on tour, writing about what's happening on tour. And the thing I love about my job now is it's diverse. Like, I went down to Australia, New Zealand, wrote this 12-page travel log, and that was obviously a great adventure and a great experience. And I'm not a slave to just professional golf, because I enjoy the buzz of the big events, and obviously there's huge personalities in the game, but I wouldn't want to write only about the PGA Tour. I think that would get a little stale quickly.
You talk about the big events, and of course you've had the pleasure of covering, some of golf's biggest events, from major championships to Ryder Cups. What is your approach when you get to an event like that, Alan? Because there's so much that you can write about, but you got to find something that's compelling but also unique. And I think what Sports Illustrated golf writers for so long did such a good job of is, reporting on stories that just no one else reported on.
Yeah, well, it certainly changed. I love the challenge of the big game stories, as we call them at SI, where you had to sum up the whole week, and you had to tell a story, and you had to have a hero and a villain, and you needed a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you needed a sense of place, and you had to have your own information and your own reporting to make it special and unique. Because when the magazine came out, 3 days after the tournament, everyone already knew who won the Masters, but they wanted to be taken in a Butler cabin, or they wanted to be in the parking lot Sunday night with the winner, or on the rope line with Butch Harmon or whomever. Like there needed to be a sense of intimacy and access, and you had to tell people stuff they didn't already know. And so that was a fun challenge, and on a super tight deadline as well, because those stories are always due Monday morning, and you often wouldn't start writing until 10 or 11 o'clock the night before. So that was a different kind. It was a lot of schmoozing. You're always constantly out on the course talking to people, just hoovering up your own reporting. Now, I write every day for golf.com at these events, and by definition, if you're sitting there typing, you can't be out on the course, and there's speed is important. You need to get your stories up fast because they're perishable. If it's Thursday, the first round, and you post at 11 p.m., by the time people read it the next morning, there's already, the plot lines have changed because there's guys on the golf course, there's a new leader, there's whatever. So if you have any shelf life at all, you have to get the story up at like 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 7, but give people a chance to find it and enjoy it before it's totally overtaken. So, it's probably, I'm not out on the course as much as I'd like. You have to actually just pump out the stories, but the mandate's the same. I mean, you have to find unique angles, you have to find original reporting, you have to I started at SI before there was the internet existed, basically, so it was a totally different world. Now there's so much coverage from so many ways. It's hard to find something unique, so if you can, you have to really guard it jealously and get it out there as fast as possible. But ultimately, golf has always been a vehicle for good writing, and there's always been a literary kind of bent to this how people tell the story of the sport. So that it's still about finding good stories and telling them really well, whether you're on a daily deadline or a weekly or whatever it may be. So the job has changed, but kind of the mission remains the same.
And in doing research for this interview, I found one of your old game stories from SI, and it was of the 2004 Masters when Phil Mickelson won. And the lead reads as follows. Late on Easter Sunday, Phil Mickelson stood over a birdie putt on the 18th hole to win the 68th Masters, and it was as quiet as church. Thousands of fans had encircled the green, glowing from sweat, and the most exciting Masters finish since 46-year-old Jack Nicklaus reinvented himself in 1986. Ernie Els, the game's gentle giant, was in the clubhouse after a dazzling 67, having rushed to the lead of the tournament with 2 eagles in a span of 6 holes midway through the round. Mickelson had chased him down with a back nine charge for the ages, and now, having endured countless heartbreaks in his decade-plus pursuit of a first major championship, Mickelson was facing the most important putt of his career, 18 feet, that meant so much to so many. just a beautifully written lead and just, an overall brilliantly written piece. And I just, my question is just, when you're writing that, are you someone that can like write the body of the story and the end before the lead? Or are you someone that has to start like top to bottom and then, just figure out in such a short amount of time how you're going to present this in the most compelling way possible?
Yeah, it's always different. I mean, ideally the top of the story is really important to me. It's hard for me to get anything else until I'm happy with the first few paragraphs, and it sets up everything that follows. That week, for whatever reason, I just felt like Phil was going to win it. And so I was following him on Thursday and Friday. And I think there's some little nuggets in the middle of the story about being out there with Amy and Rick Smith. And so there's some things you're going to use no matter what, because even if Phil loses a playoff to Els, he's still part of the story. And so we used to call it the middle. I mean, that was like a Rick Riley term. I got to work in my middle. That's what you do when you're doing those big SI stories. You do that on Thursday and Friday, Saturday night. You're typing things you think are going to hold up either way, or maybe they won't. But if the right guy wins and you have this reporting, then you're set for that. I mean, there's times I had 4 different stories ready to go on Sunday, depending on what was going to happen, because you just have so much material. You got to organize it. But yeah, I mean, generally, I like to start at the top and just keep flowing. But it's great when you can cut and paste 200 words here and 300 words there from stuff you'd acquired earlier in the week that still works. And that's a lifesaver when you're trying to get 2,500 words and you have 10 hours starting at midnight. It's like it's a big deal if you already have some stuff that holds up that you've typed earlier in the week. So but yeah, I mean, the essence is you have to capture the feeling. It's often going to be the last putt on Sunday, but you never know. I mean, defining moments like when Tiger won at Southern Hills, I guess that was 07 PGA. He teed off for the start of the final round, and it was just a great scene. It's this elevated tee box, and the trophy they bring out the Wanamaker trophy to the back of the box, and everyone's afraid to look at it. It's like bad luck. But Tiger's over there studying it. And he just smashed this drive. And because it's a super elevated tee box, the ball's in the air forever. And he held his finish extra long. And I just remember looking and thinking, he looked like a statue. Like they just bronzed him on the spot. And I just went back and started writing, pre-scandal Tiger. I mean, we had a lead on Sunday. It was pretty much a done deal. So it wasn't a giant leap of faith, but I had 5 or 6 paragraphs done when he made the turn. And then he wound up winning. And I think I finished by dinner time. Like that was the earliest finish ever, because I had lots of great material for early in the week, and I had my lead that I loved. And there wasn't really a defining shot or moment. He just kind of clinically won that tournament on Sunday, and no one pushed him too hard. But, if I hadn't been out there on the first tee, I wouldn't have had that. And so it's just sometimes you just get lucky. I mean, being in the right place at the right time is an acquired skill, but there's a luck element as well. But it is the kind of experience and maybe a certain knack for it. When something happens, you can recognize that, wow, that's going to be a great lead to my story. And then you have to really, it's very ephemeral, right? Like when you got to really absorb a lot that's happening, maybe get a couple interviews on the fly, like what, because that moment comes and goes. So if you can wrangle it, it's a great feeling, because when I think any writer on deadline, when they know their lead, it's like, it's a monumental relief.
So how does if you do happen to write sort of a Sunday game story now for golf.com, how does it differ compared to the one at SI? And if it's shorter now, does it have the same feel and weight as it does now compared to for the magazine, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I try to approach it exactly the same way. Some of those SI game stories were 2,500 words. A couple might have been 3,000. I don't think we're not running stuff that long on golf.com. And again, on Sunday night, I mean, if my story's not there, people are going to find it at another website from another writer. So getting done is the most important thing. You just can't labor over it for an extra 3 or 4 hours because your whole body's gonna go to sleep, literally. So, um, but having that sense of place is still so important. And um, the pre-writing is important. When I wake up Sunday morning, I'm working on my story, and it may all go pear-shaped, and you're just gonna have to scramble. But hopefully, a lot of it holds up. And I'm thinking about like when at Carnoustie, when Tiger got beaten by Frankie Molinari. That's one of the best stories I've ever done on Deadline, and there was a lot of reporting there, and it's probably 1,500 words. I mean, it's as good as anything I ever did for SI. Um, and I'd say, Shane Lowry at Portrush, same thing. I mean, I love how that story came out, and I'd have to look at the length, but it's probably 15, 16, 700 words. I mean, it's got some heft to it, but there's just a lot of reporting in there. And I think you could tuck that into Sports Illustrated, and it would work just fine. So I still try and bring the same level of care, the same amount of craft and enthusiasm and reporting. But ultimately, I kind of my unofficial deadline is like an hour after the last putt drops. I got to press send. So there's a lot of pressure to write as things are happening. Whereas SI, you could kind of sit back and just watch and soak it all in. You could be out on the course a little bit more on Sunday. What I'll do is I'll walk the beginning of the round, try and get people, try and observe things. Usually I'll go in and start typing when the leaders are near the turn, and I'll run out for the last few holes to be there in person. But it gives me a solid couple hours head start. But it doesn't always work out. I mean, sometimes the guy who thinks going to win just doesn't win, and then it's more of a scramble. And but you just have to bank on your experience and just kind of bet on the come sometimes.
I want to end the conversation by talking a little bit about just the future of journalism. I know that a lot of my listeners are young journalists and writers looking to break into the industry. And you broke it in a time, Alan, where, print and newspapers and magazine were the big form. And now, as we mentioned earlier, certainly golf media is dominated by this new form of media. I know that you are very technologically savvy. You have 54,000 followers on Twitter. But do you think that you could have had the same success breaking in now compared to breaking in back when you did in this industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I kind of always knew I'd wind up at Sports Illustrated, but I thought I would come out of school and in those days you'd go find a small newspaper somewhere, and then you'd try and do a lot of great work and get hired by a medium-sized newspaper, and then you'd get to the LA Times or some, big newspaper. Like, it was kind of this gradual thing. And you had to go down these pre-assigned lanes. Now you can just create your own avenues into this sport. I mean, obviously, like the guys that know Laying Up, they didn't really have any formal journalism training. They just, they started a Twitter feed and then a website, and, they become an important part of the golf media. So, they just blaze their own trail. So in some ways it's a lot easier now because there's not the traditional gatekeepers, but it's also, it's harder to get a good paying job. Like, even if you go to work for a small newspaper when you're 22, what would have been my path, it was still a pretty good job. You get benefits, and you're getting a salary, and you have colleagues, you have support, and you have experienced editors who can help you. If you just start your own website, you're just winging it, and you might make $1 for a year or 2 years or whatever it may be. And so the internet has been this democratizing force, but it doesn't mean it's an easy way to make a living. When you start out down your own path. So there's pros and cons to both. I mean, for me, because I got in a great internship at Sports Illustrated and I did well, I kind of jumped the line. But I don't know if it's harder or easier now. It's certainly different, and it's much more personality driven. When I would say my first 15 years on the beat, no one even knew what I looked like as far as readers go, and that was fine. I was just out there walking around. And now when you walk around, all the reporters are in their own ways, kind of their own brands, through social media, through all the videos of playing golf with their buddies, through all the the video storytelling and the podcast and all of that. And so it's I kind of liked it the old way where you're a little more anonymous and it was just the work spoke for itself. But you just got to keep up with the times. And so you can build a brand pretty quickly coming in through some of the side doors. But again, it always comes down to the same thing, which is you have to be doing good work. Like the content is what's going to ultimately matter. And so the people who are putting out, whether it's podcasts or video storytelling or it's the written word, if you put out enough good stuff, folks are going to notice. And if what you're putting out is kind of lame, it doesn't matter how much sizzle and how much self-promotion you do. Ultimately, you're not going to find an audience, because readers are pretty sophisticated, more now than ever, and they're looking for good stuff. And if you deliver it, then I think you're going to make a good living. And if you put out things that are a B- or a C+, it's going to be a challenge. And that's how it was back when I started. It was just a different kind of medium, but ultimately the work is what matters. And if you do really great work, you're going to find an audience. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's a very candid answer, because I think, there are different mediums now to disseminate sports news and stories, but the basic tenets remain the same, which is producing good content, producing really compelling stories. It may be for a different medium, but I think that those stories, and if they're told really well, I think people will still follow you, even though there's different ways to embrace and cultivate a following compared to when you did it back at Sports Illustrated and compared to now when other people are creating podcasts or their own brands on social media. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I'm kind of right in the middle generationally. I'm how old? I'm 47. So I'm not too old, but I did come up in a totally different era. But I can hang out with the young guys, and I obviously have a big presence on social media. And I was big in podcasts for a while, and then everyone had a podcast, and I kind of lost interest. But I can do podcasts, I can do videos, whatever. But I kind of straddle these two different worlds. I guess this is how I like it. I'm not in either camp, really. I'm not one of the grouchy old guys, and I'm not one of the young whiz kids. I'm just in the middle doing my own thing. But I definitely pay attention to both, and I see the value in both approaches and try and support both. But it is interesting. I mean, it's just how much it's evolved, and I don't know enough about the other beats to speak as knowledgeably. But the difference is, like, the NBA and the NFL is not so experiential. If you're on the NBA beat or the NFL, you're not going out and playing football, in Lambeau Field. Like, you don't have that access the way, like, I can go out and play Pebble Beach. And so I think those are a little more traditional in that it's less about the first person and the journalist or content creator. They're not quite the center of things. It's still more about the sport or the player. But golf, because those who follow the game also play the game, and they want to know about the courses and the gear and the clothes, and it's just a unique little world unto itself, where there's a lot of different ways to interact with the fans and from a lot of different vantage points. And so the golf media has grown, expanded, and diversified tremendously. And I guess there could be a few downsides to that, but basically, I think it's a healthy thing. I think there's something for everyone. And if you're a fan of the game, you can pick and choose. You've never had so many options for people telling you about the sport at the professional and the recreational level. And so I'm sure the fans love it. It's made our jobs a little more complicated, and there's a little more tension maybe in how things get done from the different camps. But ultimately, it's about the fans, and I think golf fans are probably happier than they've ever been. So that's a good thing.
Last question for you, Alan. And in doing research for this interview, I noticed that you spent many a summer working at Pebble Beach, and I'm just curious if you have a funny story to tell from your time working at one of the most memorable courses in the United States.
Oh yeah, gosh. I mean, those were the days. This is the early '90s when it was the first. There was two Japanese ownership groups, and I was there kind of during the transition, but there was very little oversight. So we went out and played the course all the time. Like I'd had 2 opening shifts a week. I was done by like 1:30 in the summer, and have lunch and then just go tee it up. I mean, it's really where I learned how to play the game, which is quite an amazing experience. But yeah, I mean, because it's Pebble Beach, a lot of big name, famous people rolled through there, and I was like the guy waiting for them to park their car and grab their clubs and get them organized. And so I did have a lot of funny interactions. One time there was like a Nike retreat up in Carmel Valley, and so Charles Barkley, Michael Jordan, and David Robinson came out to play, and their fourth was Reggie Jackson randomly because he lives locally, and so Barkley was the first guy to show up, and just at that moment, this big tourist bus arrived and disengorged like 50 people, and so he didn't want to deal with it. So he's like, "Hey man, where can I hide out?" I said, "Just come to the back of the pro shop. We got this head pro's office, and we got some gear, and so we're just hanging out." And I was a huge basketball fan. I played in high school, and we were I was at UCLA, which was we won the national championship while I was an undergrad. So I mean, I love basketball. So we're just talking about hoop, and I'm just asking every question I've ever wanted to ask. And he's like, "Man, I'm thirsty. Is there anything to drink?" I said, "No. Well, there's the vending machine across the street. I'll run and get you whatever you want." Barkley pulls out this brick of like $100 bills. I was like, "Yeah, I only think it takes ones." He's like, "Man, I don't got any ones." And of course, I had a pocket full of tips. Like, "That's all right, Charles, I got you." So I ran across the street. I got like 2 Diet Cokes. He's like, I'll get you after the round, man. And I was like, "All right, whatever." I didn't really care. And so they went out and played. And of course, word got out when they came off of 18. There was a bunch of people, and it was sort of chaotic. And they just disappeared. So to this day, Charles Barkley owes me $2. And I'm going to collect at some point. But anyway, that just popped into my mind. Yeah, there was a lot of funny things like that. And it really was the greatest summer job ever. And that's, if everything goes wrong in the golf media and every print product disappears and all the websites get shut down, I'll probably wind up back at Pebble Beach as a caddy, because it's a great life and it's a fun job. So that's my exit strategy if I need one, but hopefully not for a long time.
No, definitely, hopefully not, and a great story to wrap up this edition of the podcast. Alan Shipnuck, he's a senior writer at golf.com and Golf Magazine. Make sure to follow him on Twitter and read his stuff. It's always a worthwhile read. Alan, thank you so much for coming on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
All right, thanks for having me. That was a fun chat.